I can try hard.
You might want to start one or two minutes early that we have then, Peter.
Do we want to wait until they're up and live?
I think so.
Yeah, so it's live now, so.
Is it? Okay. Okay, I'll call the meeting to order then. Everybody's present. The agenda is in front of you. Could I have someone move agenda?
I'll move.
Second? Do we have a seconder?
I'll second it, Peter.
Okay, thank you. So it's been moved and seconded to approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any conflict of interest that they wish to declare or not wish to, that they need to declare this evening? Okay, having heard none, we will continue with the draft 2022 budget. And Don, are you going to start off?
I'm going to give an introduction, Mr.
Okay.
Chair. So what you have before you is not the first version of the budget that staff worked on, but rather the results of several iterations. We're confident that it's the most prudent recommendation for you, given the circumstances that exist. As we've done in past years, Mary Kay is going to lead us through the actual budget and the numbers, and Brett and Lonnie and I will be here to answer operational questions and drill down if when necessary. But with that, I guess I'll pass the baton to Mary Kay.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am just going to take a moment and share this screen. Get my trusty highlighter out. Okay, so this is the budget overview, and I'm sure you've all had a chance to read it. So I'm not going to go through it in detail because we will hit on most of the points as we go through the presentation. But just to summarize some of the overlying assumptions in the budget, annual consumer price index for New Brunswick has increased 3.6% over last year. So our salary ranges for the purposes of this budget, as well as board honorariums, have been increased by 3%. And as well, during the budget process, we did review many of the salaries, and we wanted to ensure that they were consistent with current labor markets. And that did result in some adjustments for salaries across all of the different divisions for 10 non-management employees. So you will see increases there as we go through the various budgets. So without further ado, that will bring us right to the numbers. Can everybody see that okay, or should I? You have the papers in front of you. Okay, perfect. So the first budget that we have is the corporate services budget. So as you know, this is where all of the expenses are charged that are then subsequently charged out to the various divisions. So what I'm going to focus on is I'll focus on the 2022 budget column, highlighting any changes from the previous year, and I'll try to keep it to the main lines, so the bold lines. And then if there's any variances, I will get into the details and kind of describe what the changes are. So what we're seeing in corporate services for salaries and benefits is a budget for 2022 of $423,274. That's a $21,000 increase over the previous year, or 5.2%. So there's a couple reasons why this is higher than 3% that you would expect. In addition to the 3% cost of living adjustment, we did have one employee whose salary was reviewed and an adjustment was made for the 2022 budget. And then the other increase that you'll notice is in this group insurance line, we did have one employee that previously wasn't part of our medical and dental plan, and they opted to come on to this. So that is impacting the 2022 budget as well. Moving on to the governance expense for the 2022 budget, we have an amount of $59,000, That is $2,500 lower than what we had budgeted in the previous year. And if you look above, you'll see that that variance comes from training and development. We did increase that budget for 2021 because we did know we would have new board members coming on. So it would result in more training, and that's been adjusted in 2022's budget accordingly. For administration expenses, we have an amount budgeted of $157,704. That's about $3,800 higher than what was budgeted in the previous year. And what contributes to that variance is you will see professional services, the budget has been reduced from $16,000 to $10,000. And then we've added the new line item for information technology. You may recall when we were going through the June financials, we talked about how we have made a change on how we are recording IT expenses. So now, rather than charge the IT expenses directly to the divisions, when we made the switch to the cloud, we are now charging them to corporate services, and they are then allocated out to the various divisions. So that's the one change with regard to administration. So total budgeted corporate services expenses for 2022 is $639,978. That's up about $22,315 or 3.6%. But when you take into account that the IT expenses were $15,000 alone, it's more like about a 1.2% increase. So what that means then is these expenses get allocated out to the various divisions. So the $89,786, that's what cooperative and regional planning will pay. Planning and development, they pay a share of $193,000. Solid waste pays $345,000, and power generation $11,365. So I'll just pause there. Any questions on corporate services?
I'm just curious. We've decreased our professional services by $6,000. What are we giving up, or what don't we need anymore?
So we went through the previous few years to see what we're actually spending, and it was more in line with about the 10,000, because you will see we do have audit fees and legal broken out separately. So this is just the other professional services. For instance, when we do our annual report, the designer, that kind of stuff goes in there. And so we just didn't need the 16,000 that was allocated previously.
The information technology, is that a cost that previously had been absorbed by the different divisions and is no longer in those divisions?
Yeah. So what you're going to see when we go through there, you're not going to notice in planning and development because they had other office costs that offset that, but you will see it in solid waste that the cost is decreased. So
Okay.
yeah.
So from my perspective, Peter, it's easier for me to get a handle on what the organization is spending overall because I see it in one space. Whereas before this change, you had to look inside the planning division's operations, solid waste operations, to get a sense of overall what we were spending on IT.
No, I think that's a great thing to do. And the other one is just kind of curious as well as on the rent. It's not often you see a decrease in rent. Did we give up his office or what?
That's actually this space.
Okay.
And it was just a little slight change in the calculation of how we determined this portion versus the other portion.
Yeah, that's great. Does anyone else out there, Mike, John, Dave, do you have any questions on this? Guess not.
So the next budget that you see is the cooperative and regional planning services. This is a pretty straightforward budget. There's only a few line items and it's very consistent with what you have seen in the prior year. So member fees is actually a derivative. So basically you take the expenses, you less your other sources of revenue, and that's how you determine what the member fees are. So we were fortunate because our expenses have decreased slightly by $309. And our second previous year surplus increased from the previous year to $38,398. So for the member fees, we were actually able to reduce those by $1,671. So in the expenses, we have $20,000 allocated for regional planning. This is consistent with how we've done it in prior years. And really, it's a contingency in case there is a project that the board wants to take on. There's no actual plan for what this could be, but if it's something that the board so decides, we do have the funds in there. If they are not spent, then you see it come through as a second previous year surplus in 2 years' time. And then on the corporate services side, as we talked about, it's decreased slightly from the previous year, getting you to a total expenses of the $109,786. So what does that mean for your specific municipality or community? This is the breakdown of how that gets allocated out. So the legislation requires us to calculate this cost base 50% on tax base, 50% on population. So if you look at the 2022 column, this is the specific fee. So the first one for Cambridge Narrows for 2022, we'll be paying $398. That compares with $411 in the previous year. And find whichever municipality you're interested in and see, and you will notice that they have all decreased. Any questions on that budget?
Okay.
All right. So the next budget that brings us to is the Planning and Development Services budget. And again, the revenue is derived by taking the expenses less our other sources of revenue. So our expenses increased by just under $68,000 for the 2022 budget, and our revenues increased about $47,000. So that leaves about a $20,000 increase required from the contributions from participating members in order to balance the budget. So the contribution from participating member budget total for the year is $1.498 million. Other revenue budgeted at $5,000. That's our blue plate revenue. We have seen some growth there, so we've increased the budget accordingly. And our second previous year surplus being brought in was higher than it was in the previous year as well by about $45,000. So total revenue budgeted of $1,555,000. So for administration expenses, we have a budget of $465,000 for the 2022 year. That is down about $6,000 from what was budgeted in the previous year. And you can see there are some fluctuations from the line items, the major ones being we do have some savings on salaries and benefits with one employee, and our office expenses, although we have some savings with regard to the IT, the supplies as well as maintenance is higher than we have seen in the previous year. So that budget was increased accordingly. For building inspections, I don't think there's any surprise there. Everyone's aware that we did hire an additional building inspector to meet the level of demand that we're seeing. So that's why you see that additional cost of $60,000 for a budget of $404,000. For planning and development expenses, we have a budget of just under $475,000 for a slight increase of $2,500. And then on the planning advisory service, that would be the PRAC. We increased the budget accordingly so that that would include 12 members at 12 meetings per year. So that total is $17,200. The allocation from corporate services comes in at $193,000. We saw that on the corporate services side for a total expense of $1,555,000. And then we get to the breakdown of how that is allocated out. And again, only the communities that are that receive this service pay for it. So that is listed here. And you can see in 2022. So for instance, Hanwell will pay $168,705. That's about $3,900 higher than what was in the previous year. You will notice that some communities are actually paying less. And the reason for that would be there was a decrease in their tax base or the percentage of our total tax base decreased. So some are paying higher, some are paying lower, depending on what the tax base did in 2021. Any questions on that one?
Does anyone have any questions?
I just wanted to make a comment, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
The PRAC salaries have never increased for years now. and all the committees on the RSC 11. I think we're getting quite a variance there now, and I know it's too late for this year, but next year I think this is going to have to be looked at. Being on the PRAC myself, I know how much time goes into reading over all these cases, as Lonnie can attest to. And, as far as the other committees go, I think there's just as much work done at the PRAC as any of the other committees. And I'm just bringing this up that I would like to see that increase next year.
Mr. Chair, I think that's fair comment, and we'll make a note of that. I think that Mike's correct. I'm not. It likely should be the same rate as other committees, and we can certainly put that into play for the following year. I think we can do that without any impact, because one of the things I did want to mention with respect to salaries was that I'd encourage you to look at the planning salaries overall as a group, as opposed to when we look at inspections and we see a 17% increase. It's kind of shocking. But because of changes in other divisions, the real increase in salaries for the planning and development side is 4.6%. Much more modest, and really it's only $16,000 higher than what you would expect with a 3% increase. And because of timing differences, we'll be able to hold the line at that salary level for the 2023, because in 2023 we'll experience greater savings over some repositioning that we've done. And so I think that's a good year to address what Mike has raised.
Thank you, Don.
Thanks, Mike. While we're on PRAC, my understanding is that for special meetings, the fee probably isn't sufficient to cover the cost of the meetings.
So the special fee is right now it's $1,500.
It is, okay.
And I don't think that that's sufficient. And it's one of the things that I have in my file for the governance committee, who looks at bylaws, and that fee is set in the bylaw to look at in their review in December. Because it needs to be enough to cover the committee members' honorariums, travel, and the extra operating costs that we incur by putting together a special meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Are we okay with no further questions on this one? So, okay, I guess you.
All right. So that brings us to the solid waste division. And this is really just a summary, and it breaks it down by landfill and recycling. We just do this for disclosure purposes, so you can see that the recycling does generate a loss, the landfill does generate a surplus. Adding the two divisions, not really divisions, but operations together, you will come up with a balanced budget. So this budget that you have before you is based on having the EIA application approved. But it also puts the commission in a financial position to be able to financially manage should the application be delayed or denied, with moderate tipping fee increases required over the next few years. If the application is approved, we do expect that minimal tipping fee increases will be required over the same time period. So as we review this budget, what I'm going to do is point out any changes that would be required if the EIA was not approved. And then we'll summarize what the impact will be at the end. In this budget as well, we do assume the financing of a dozer at an estimated cost of $475,000 over a period of 5 years. The budget overview details the financial impact of this, which we are required to disclose to you by the Municipal Capital Borrowing Board. The debt service ratio is estimated to be 14.83%, which is very close to our maximum internally imposed target of 15%. We did know that as we approached 2023, we would get very close to that 15%, and we are. But once the power generation loan is paid off in 2023, that ratio is going to drop substantially. So there's no concern there at this point. So starting with the landfill, for regular garbage, this budget includes 79,000 tons at a rate of $102 per ton, which is a $3 tipping fee increase. C and D, there's no change to, same tonnage, same rate. Other revenue has increased 130,000 from the previous year's budget. That relates to the sale of the dozer that we just talked about. So it is a replacement piece of equipment, so the revenue comes into the budget. And then our second previous year surplus has been reduced from what it was in 2021 to 82,217. And we are budgeting no transfer in from the capital reserve, whereas last year we budgeted for $250,000 to come in. So what that means is at the end of the day, we estimate a capital reserve balance of 1.9 million at the end of 2022. So total revenue is budgeted at $8,807,000. On the expense side of things, salaries and benefits are budgeted at $2,763,000. That is an increase of almost $117,000. That includes the 3% cost of living adjustment. The remainder is due to the salaries that were adjusted for our operators. For maintenance costs, we have a budget of $957,102. That is up almost $107,000 from the previous year's budget. And there's a few items that are leading to that. The first being capping and landfill maintenance. So we did increase our budget for our rock and gravel. This is typically an area where we always go over budget. We know we're going to go over budget. We just don't ever have the room in the budget to increase it. So we are trying to really make a conscious effort to make the budget match what we're actually spending. LGM stands for landfill gas maintenance. That's increased by $54,500 from the previous year's budget. And that relates to an order of sulfur-treat for our gas facility. And then the other increase relates to household hazardous waste. Our contract is up very shortly. And so we do anticipate that costs will rise with regard to that. So we have increased that to $165,000. For equipment cost, the budget has actually been reduced from the previous year to $789,750, a reduction of almost $126,000. The majority of which is coming from maintenance and parts. In 2021, we included tire purchases for 3 pieces of equipment, which were not required to be replaced in 2022. So the budget has been reduced accordingly. For fuel costs, we are estimating that our fuel prices will rise. So that is factored in, and that's why you're seeing the increase in the fuel. Baylor costs are.
Would this be a good time to ask if anyone had any particular questions on the landfill itself without the recycling?
I have one more page of
Oh, you do?
landfill, but if
Okay.
you want to do
No,
one
no,
page,
that's
and then
fine. Sorry, I'll just,
it's a bigger one, so it takes up a couple more pages.
okay.
But if you want to ask from the first page, that's fine.
It's fine.
All right, so Baylor costs, we've budgeted $520,500. It's about a $2,000 decrease from the previous year. You may recall that we were doing some work on the baling facility with regard to a chain in 2021, so we had increased the budget. We've left it the same because that work has not been done in 2021. And it's going to be pushed to 2022. So that's why you're seeing the budget stay the same. Whereas in 2023, if that work's done in 2022, we'll estimate that that budget will go down by about $130,000. Administration expenses are budgeted at $754,000. It's a $41,000 decrease from the previous year's budget. The major factors there are a decrease in HST expenses, which basically are just a derivative of what your costs are, because that's the portion that we don't get a refund on. And then in office, because our IT expenses are allocated out to corporate services now, you see a decrease in there as well. Debt servicing is another area where our expenses have gone down. We have 2 debentures that are being retired in 2021. So that leaves a balance for principal and interest payments in 2022 of $739,900. Post-closing costs are $264,350. That is based on $3.11 per ton, up from $2.96 in the previous year. For our capital expenditures, included in the $220,000 is 2 site vehicles at a cost of $60,000, scale replacement at a cost of $85,000, and paving at a cost of $75,000. So you are seeing an increase in capital purchases paid for through operations, but a decrease accordingly in the cell expansion. That is again assuming that the EIA application is successful. If that does not happen, you're going to see cell expansion costs be in the range of $2.1 million. And you're also going to see your HST costs, which were $131,000 under this budget, jump to about $212,000 under the non-approval of the EIA scenario. Our allocation from corporate services is $345,000. And then we have a transfer to the power generation facility. So under the legislation, we are required to produce balanced budgets. So if the power generation does not have a balanced budget on its own, solid waste is essentially on the hook for it. So what this is doing is this is bringing in what the loss would be on the power generation facility, so that that can produce a balanced budget. When we get to the power generation budget, you will see what's causing that loss, and it is solely because of the second previous year deficit that is being brought in. So in 2020, we had a deficit of about $442,000. So that's brought into the budget. This is to cover that, to essentially balance the fund. So total landfill expenses are $7,995,000, which is down $32,000 from the previous year's budget and produces a surplus of $812,000. Any questions on the landfill?
Well, I just have a couple of maybe clarification. You mentioned on the household hazardous waste that you have a feeling that the price, the cost is going to go up. What causes you to have that feeling?
Typically the contracts always go up. I'll let Brett deal with that one. The other thing is costs right now are running higher than 140,000. So that's the other part, but
Yeah, it would be a combination of the popularity and inflation. So I believe, and without looking at it, I believe we've got an option to extend one additional year at this point. And on the last extension, it did reflect inflation. So that would be the combination of those two factors.
Does the volume of hazardous waste have an impact on it as well?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I mean by when I say popularity. Absolutely.
Okay.
The volume collected results in higher disposal costs.
Thank you.
any other questions?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm just trying to line my pages up. Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
So you're muted, Mike.
Mike, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. Under cell expansion, I see a figure of 230,000. What will that be if the EIA is not approved?
And that will be the 2.1 million.
Wow.
Exactly.
And I had another question too on the Baylor building, 135,000. What is that? What does that entail?
So that would be,
Repairs or renovations or?
it would be some repairs and renovations. It would be electricity. it would be propane. I believe propane's used in that as well. And then the baler maintenance is the actual, just the baler machine.
That's correct.
Right. Okay, thank you.
That's about my knowledge of machinery. All right. Oh, recycling. We have revenue budgeted of 542,000. That's up about 35,000 from the previous year. And you can see that's solely to do with metal. We are receiving higher market prices for the sale of our metal right now. So that is resulting in that favorable variance from the previous year. On the expense side of things, no change in our bin purchase budget, 10,000. Our salaries and benefit is budgeted at 828,000. That's about a $39,000 increase. Again, that's the 3% cost of living, an adjustment for 2 individuals. And then we do have 1 employee that is eligible to come on and receive benefits. So medical and dental and pension. So that assumes that he stays with us and he does is brought on as full-time with benefits. Maintenance costs, the budget's consistent with the previous year, 63,000. Equipment costs is down about 10,000 from previous year's budget to $96,425. The baler is down from previous years by 1,500 to 162,500. Administration expenses down slightly to 125,500. Debt servicing down to 67,975. So overall expenses for recycling are up slightly, almost 18,000 to 1,354,000, generating that 812,000 deficit that is subsidized by the landfill. Any questions on recycling specifically?
It's not.
Okay. So in summary, what this budget does is it proposes a tipping fee of $102 per ton or a $3 increase. It leaves an estimated capital reserve balance of 1.9 million. If the EIA is not approved before construction begins in 2022, then our expenses will increase by 1.95 million. So that's the difference between either scenario. We will have to withdraw most of the balance from the capital reserve in order to pay for those cell costs, which then the capital reserve will have to be rebuilt over the next few years, probably 2 to 3 years. And we will likely run an operational deficit in the range of about 250,000, which would then have to be brought into 2024's budget. So the impact of that on the next probably 4 to 5 years is an increase of about $2 per ton each year for the next 4 years, based on the information that we do have today. That make it clear the difference between the 2 different options, depending on if the EIA goes through or not.
It basically says we will manage it with a $2 per ton increase each year for 4 years.
Based on the information today. Yeah, it can change.
Well, yes, I understand it. So.
For sure. Yeah,
Plus
it.
the rundown of our capital reserve,
Exactly.
which, I can't think of anything that endorses the shrewdness of having reserves. Absent those reserves, this would be an unpleasant discussion.
So that brings us to our last budget for the evening, which is power generation. So you may recall that in 2022, our first engine will reach the 60,000 hour interval, which requires a complete block swap or engine refit, however you want to put it. It's a lot of money to change the engine out. We knew this was coming. It's something that we've been thinking about for a long time. So what we are proposing in this budget is we would borrow from the Municipal Capital Borrowing Board for the entire cost, which is estimated to be about 900,000, and that would be used to pay for this block swap engine refit. So that is not included in what you see in the operational budget. That would be borrowed for. So with that said, on the operational side, what we're seeing is in 2021, we're actually generating more revenue than we have. We're on track to generate more revenue, I should say, than we have for about the 5 previous years. So we are having a good year. So we did increase the budget in 2022 accordingly. So we have revenue budget of $900,000. We talked about, when we talked about the solid waste operating transfer, this is that $411,000 that's required to come over from solid waste operating fund to power generation operating fund. And that is essentially to balance this fund so that it has a balanced budget. On the expense side of things, the operational costs are down. We've budgeted just over $300,000. The reason for that is the majority of the repairs and maintenance is going to be financed because it is a box swap. It's considered capital, and we're going to finance it through the Municipal Capital Finance Corporation. So that's why you're seeing this $150,000 much less than the previous year, because this included some additional repairs and maintenance. This is just ongoing maintenance that would be required. For the administration expenses, it's up about $5,500 from the previous year's budget, and that relates to an increase in the insurance rates. Debt servicing is very consistent. It's just under $414,000. We do have capital expenditures of $85,000 included in there. That is for paving around the facility. Our allocation from corporate services is $11,365. And then this is where you see the deficit from 2020 being brought in. So we had a deficit in 2020 of the $442,000. We have to bring that into our 2022 budget, which is why we require that transfer from the solid waste operating. Questions on power generation?
Any questions?
Yes,
Mike?
I had a question, Mr. Chair. My understanding is the original debt on the generators will be paid off in 2023. Is that a coincidence that the engine has to be replaced in 2023, or was that kind of planned all along?
That was.
Oh, Mary Kay?
How long? We knew it was 60,000 hours. And, you know, that debt was put together by the previous commission. And, you know, you can see the benefit of their planning in doing that now.
Yes, I agree. It worked out well. Thank you.
Anyone else? So I just have a question on terminology. When you talk about a complete engine swap, are we taking an engine out, putting a brand new one in?
Exactly. It saves us downtime. There's 2 options. You can rebuild the engine,
Yeah.
in which case you're down for approximately 2 months. You lose 2 months worth of revenue. Or you can pull it out, plop a new one in, and send the other one back to Joe.
So the swap is like 2 weeks or a month? I don't know.
It'll probably be about 2 weeks. There's also a software upgrade, some ancillary work to be done as well.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, that's what we tried to do. I mean, it's pretty straightforward operationally. Organizationally, the big question in front of us is what's going to happen with the EIA? We don't know the answer to that. We try to develop a budget that provides the board with flexibility and one where we don't react. We're not reactive and put in a large increase this year that we subsequently don't need. We think it's the responsible approach, and we expect that, but we're curious as to what the committee thinks, how we should present that to the board, because we need to remember a significant population of the board it'll be the first time they're seeing our operating budget. And so if you have advice for us as to how to present that, I mean, we did it today. We said, look, we're going to make the optimistic suggestion, and we'll go through it, and then at the end we'll tell you how we fix the negative one. You know, maybe we need to move that up. Maybe we'll create apprehension by saying this is all dependent on events beyond our control. You know, we're curious about your views.
I, for one, Mr. Chair, I'm satisfied with the way this has been done. I think we're all clear on the figures. Thank you.
I believe that as well. It wasn't confusing, like if you start trying to say throughout the whole thing,
Right.
if this, then that, I think it's better to do the way Mary Kay presented it. It's quite clear. I mean, the budget is the budget. The only variable, it seems, is whether staff get 3% or not
Right,
in reality.
right,
And that's the only thing we really have control over. The rest is, and the $2 increase if we don't get the EIA is $2 plus the increase in the budget that year. So it's not just $2, it's $2 plus, and this year it's 3.
right.
So it could be, and I lived through that first $10 increase
You don't
many
want to
years
go back to
ago.
that.
Don't want to go back to that. So I like the way it's presented. I mean, that was a total surprise back then.
Yeah.
And communities weren't happy about it. But that was the reality. And this was back in the year mid-90s.
So the reason we picked 3% was, which is lower than inflation is running. And, you know, we picked that because that's the top of the range that the Bank of Canada considers to be acceptable. And, you know, they can't stand against the market forces, but in the long run, they're going to bring inflation back to 3 somehow. And, so that's how we arrived at that number.
And that's fair in my mind. I just don't, there's not many variables.
Yeah.
It is what it is. And, I mean, that's about the only one.
And I think the way, I agree with everyone, I think the way this was presented is nice. It's relevant, you know, it's clear. There are several new members of the board, nothing's going to be, and I'll do credit to the new members. There's going to be murky. So,
Right.
you know, there's no assumptions about what someone might understand or not understand. So it may take a little longer to go through that and explain some of the terminology stuff. So it's going to be real tough for them to, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, to play all those variables. So you just have to do what you did tonight. And
I think the confusing part to most people will be second previous year deficit surplus, because it's hard for people to get their head around that and what that really means.
In fact, that's the only non-standard accounting entry sort of in this.
The reality is you said 2 years ago you needed this much money and you only spent that, so I'm not giving you that much again. You got to bring it in. That's the reality of it.
I personally shouldn't admit this on this meeting, but I had a lot of difficulty because of my background. You know, what's this, 2 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't see it anywhere else.
No.
Would it be helpful in advance of the budget to allocate 5-8 minutes to second year surpluses and second year budgets?
Mike,
Deficits.
sorry, Mike, in my opinion, I think it would be helpful.
Yeah.
Because like our council, for example, we've been there.
Yeah.
And still councilors still don't
Yeah.
don't grasp that.
Yeah.
It's so new members, especially LSD members, that if that doesn't come into play,
Right.
they don't see that.
Right. So maybe Mary Kay, what we'll do is, we've addressed this before, right? We've got a presentation or a staff report that we can find and update. Yeah, it's a good observation that that's the real wrinkle.
And the other thing is that the only real source of income we have is typically others if we put the recycling and power generation aside. As I said on the board earlier on, and people were talking about not wanting increases. I used to think that I agree with another thing you got increase for until you get your head around it. I was slow at times, so that is the only source of revenue that you have from solid waste. Right?
There's other smaller sources, but that's the only one you really can control what the price would be.
Yeah.
because, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
The small ones wouldn't make it any more than what percent? How much? Five?
Maybe 5 to 8. Relatively small, that's the only one that you can really control.
Okay.
There's also, there's also, I guess, a lack of appreciation for the fact that what does a $3 price increase cost? So a $3 price increase is not only paid for by our communities. In fact, you only pay about a third of it. 2/3 of it is carried by industry. So, you know, I looked at some of the numbers earlier, and the $3 increase that we have, just for Hanwell, for example, it's $3,700. Now, nobody wants to pay $3,700 extra dollars, but it's not a large amount relative to their overall budget. They're right to hold our feet to the fire about it, for sure. But so understanding that this cost is shared across industry and our communities is helpful as well.
So anybody on the committee have any further comments or questions for the staff? No? So with that, Don?
So I guess that means that we don't see a need to get together next Thursday, so we'll cancel that meeting.
Yeah.
And we'll be ready to present this in the September meeting to the board. We'll do a primer, a 5 to 10 minute primer on second year surpluses and deficits in advance of that. And we'll prepare a draft committee report on for you to have a look at. Peter, I think you've seen the one on our previous meeting. And so we'll be good to go.
It's on September 9th.
Yes, September 9th. Yeah. And that will lead to, I think it's October 24th or somewhere around there, the actual, a special meeting to vote on the budget.
On behalf of the committee, I want to thank you and your staff for the great job of putting this together. Mary Kay, especially a great job of presenting it, explaining and answering questions directly without any, I call it smoke and mirrors. It makes it much simpler, and we can go into that some detail later on. So on that, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn. Somebody?
Second.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. We will see you on the 9th.
Right.